Hello and welcome everyone. I am Vishal Khandelwal and this is the 1% Show. This show is an open-ended exploration into the minds of the wisest people around to help us learn to think, invest and live each day a little as 1% better. You can learn more at vishalkhandelwal.com. My guest today is Arnold Van Den Berg, CEO and Chairman of Century Management Financial Advisors that he founded in 1974 and has been featured amongst the best investors in the world. Arnold has no formal college education. Instead, his rigorous self-study, tremendous dedication, and years of industry experience are the foundation of his extensive knowledge on the markets. He began in the industry working for several financial services companies. However, he quickly found that he did not always agree with leadership, and he wanted to be in a business that he loved at a place that he believed in. Wanted to make his own decisions, Arnold formed Century Management in 1974. The noted Austrian neurologist, philosopher, and author and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl wrote in his wonderful book, Man's Search for Meaning, and I quote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Arnold, as you would learn in today's discussion, is a perfect testimony to this thought. He is an extraordinary example of how to win a losing hand and how to construct a wonderful life. He is a great investor, but his life and experiences serve as illuminating guideposts way beyond the world of investing and finance. With this and no further delay, Arnold, welcome to the 1% Show, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Well, thank you for having me, Vishal. It's a pleasure to share ideas with investors and people of interest.
Wonderful, Arnold. So, Arnold, my first question, can you please tell us a bit about your background? You were born in 1939, and that makes you the most experienced person on my show as far as living a life is concerned. So tell us your story about the remarkable first few years of your life.
Okay, well, like you said, I was born in 1939, not the best time of the world, best time to be born into the world. But we lived in Amsterdam, Holland. My dad was born in Germany. My mom was born in Poland. And when Hitler came to power in the early 30s, my dad saw the writing on the wall, and so he migrated to Holland. My mom joined him shortly after that, and they lived a good life up for the few years that they were living there before the war. 33, they moved in 33. My brother was born in 36. I was born in 39. But shortly after I was born, problems started coming up, and eventually Germany invaded Holland. I lived on the Prinsengracht, which is the same street that Anne Frank lived in. We lived at the 823 address, and she lived at 267. It was very much the same kind of family. And when Hitler came into when he went from Germany to Holland, all the Jewish people went into hiding. And Frank went into hiding in an attic. And my mom and dad had some good friends, Marie and Hank Bunt, who lived in Holland. They were friends, and they offered to hide my parents. And they hid them I visited the place afterwards. They hid them in a closet that looked like there was clothes hanging in, and there was a little trapdoor on the side, and you can go into that, and that put you behind a wall. And so most of the time they could live in the house with the people. But whenever neighbors came over, somebody knocked on the door, or the Germans started to search houses, they hid behind that wall. And they were there many times for hours. Because they never knew. And then eventually more and more of the Germans started searching the houses and so forth. So it really got to be a problem. And the problem was that my older brother, who was 5, and I was 2.5. The problem was trying to keep small kids quiet if the Germans were searching the house. You can imagine if you're there behind a wall with a couple of little kids. It was hard to keep me quiet. Nothing has changed, Vishal. And so I'm still the same way, hard to keep quiet. But anyway, they searched for an opportunity to move us around. And my mom and dad had a maid, and they offered to hide Zig and I, my older brother, on a farm. So apparently, I don't remember this, but I went to the farm with them. But they decided that they didn't want to take the chance to hide the two kids. So my mom and dad had to find an alternate way. And the way they found an alternate way, thank God for the Dutch underground, and they offered to have a 17-year-old girl. I used to say it was 19-year-old, but William Green did the research. She was actually 17. And she offered to take us from where we were and smuggle us through the German lines where they checked passports and take me to an orphanage. Now, that was a big problem because as Jewish people, we didn't have a passport. So the Dutch underground prepared a passbook for them. But it was, it was a fake one and it wasn't of good quality. So the risk was if somebody really studied it, they would see it was a fake. So what they decided to do is they checked the passport on the train. And so you get on the train, then a guard comes in, he checks everybody's passport, the whistle blows, and he gets off. So the strategy was they put a person in front of us to keep the guy busy, asking him questions and talking to him so he wouldn't have time to check the passport. And so that's what happened. The gentleman confronted the guard. He asked him questions and so forth. Finally, the whistle blew, and the lady that hid me, she wrote me a letter after the war, and she said her heart was just pounding like it was going to burst out of the chest because she never knew whether he was going to check her passport. But finally, when the whistle blew, she was very relieved. He got off, and I got to the orphanage in time. The problem was that the strategy was that where my folks were hiding, they didn't have a phone, but there was a neighbor that had a phone. So what they were going to do is the orphanage was going to call the neighbor, let them know we got there safely, and then they would come and knock on the door and tell my folks, I'm okay. Well, my folks waited for hours and hours, and nobody called. And so my mom was getting very nervous, thinking, geez, it shouldn't have taken this long. How come nobody called? So she kept saying to my dad, we ought to go somewhere and make a phone call. And he says, we can't take the chance, Manya, because we get on the street and the Gestapo sees us, that's it. So she agreed with that. But after a while, she couldn't stand it anymore. And finally she said, you go, I'm going to go make that phone call. And if you don't go with me, I'm going alone. So my dad said he had a very bad feeling. It was very risky, but he couldn't let her go alone. So he went with her. Well, they went to this butcher shop where they knew there was a phone, and the lady there knew my folks were Jewish, and they called the Gestapo and turned them in. And this is the amazing thing that you'll realize as we go into the discussion, is here were people like the 7-year-old girl was willing to risk her life. Her father, I couldn't believe that her father would send her on a suicide mission. And he had Jews in the church, he was a minister, and in his home, all at the risk of their lives. And here, the same people from the same religion and the same cultural background, they turned my folks in for a food stamp and 15 gulden. You get extra food rations if you turn in Jews. So that was really to show you the difference what character makes, and we'll talk more about that later. But that thing always stood in my mind. How could this girl do this? For me, she never even met me. Anyway, so my folks were caught. The Gestapo took them in. They took him to Westerbork, which is kind of a holding tank, and then they sent him to Auschwitz. And it was a 3-day ride on the train. It was horrible, but it was even worse when they got there because the ride on the train was sub-zero weather going into Poland. They had no food, they had no water, and there was no bathroom. All they had was a bucket, and somebody would hold up a coat while somebody went to the bathroom while the train is going. And then the feces spilled all over the place, and the place smelled, and it was just a horrible situation. Then they got to Auschwitz, and this is the first lesson. And you asked me about what is the thing that changed your life, and I want to give you a sequence of events. So there was a lady on the train who was a very good friend of my mom. She was a lot younger. I think my mom was 36 and she was 23. But they became very good friends. And her name was Beppy Cohn. She's still alive, and I actually had a Zoom call with her on her 100th birthday. So we've been friends for life. But anyway, she had an argument with her mom on the train. She was a young girl. So when they got to Auschwitz, Beppy's father said, "Beppy, I have a very bad feeling about this place. I think you should apologize to your mother." Well, all the years that I've been telling this story, I thought she did. But after talking to her son 5 or 6 years ago, he says, "No, Arnold, she never apologized. That's what she felt so bad about." Can you imagine having an argument with your mom and not apologizing, and then she went into the gas chamber? So Beppy went into the barracks that night, and she couldn't sleep, and she saw this big chimney with smoke coming out. And there was another person that was standing there who couldn't sleep. And she says, "Would you mind telling me, what is this smokestack going?" Because they didn't know. She said, "Let me ask you a question. Do you have any children?" She said, "No, I'm not married." She says, "Good. Did you come here with your parents?" She said, "Yes." She says, "Well, I hate to tell you this, but you're going to find out anyway. What they do with women, children, and older people is they gas them the first day because they don't want to deal with women who've lost their children, and they don't want to deal with old people because you're here to work. And if you can't work, they don't have any use for you, they gas you." She said she was just shocked. Can you imagine going into a place and all of a sudden finding that they gas people like that? She said all her life she has struggled with the idea that she had to deal with the fact that she couldn't apologize. And that really made a profound difference on me. You can't believe how that influenced me and how much that helped me, because one of the big problems in life for me, but for most people, is they don't deal with anger properly. And we can get into it a little bit later and show you why. But the most important thing is to learn how to process anger, to express it instead of letting it go subconscious. So what I made up as I grew up, I said, the first thing I'm going to do is, no matter what happens, whether I get in an argument with a friend or a wife or my mother or father, I'm going to apologize right away. And with my wife and my daughter, they used to have a game that they played. When I would blow up and yell or something like that, she'd say, "How long do you think it'll take for Dad to apologize?" And they bet on it. And I got to be very good. The first thing I did without thinking, look, I don't agree with everything that was said, but I apologize. Now, what I've come to do is I've refined that process. And the reason is you should apologize if you get mad, even if your position is correct. Because when you get mad, that means your emotions take over and you can't be logical. So there is a quote that says, when personality steps in, truth steps out. Or when you get angry, you are spending more time thinking about defending yourself than finding out what is right. So I realized that if you get angry, you owe the person an apology because you have stopped seeking the truth. And that deserves an apology. And then you 50% of the time you find out you're wrong anyway. So what it does is by apologizing immediately, you don't build up anger, because the longer you think about it, the more angry you get. And the other person doesn't think about the anger and it builds up. So you get together much quicker if you do that. Now, a lot of people say, well, if I'm not wrong, why should I apologize? I said, did you get mad? If you showed emotion, got mad, you owe that person an apology, because what you're saying to you is your ego is more important than finding out what is the correct truth. So apologizing helps you to get to the truth quicker and to sort out the detail. So that's a very important part of my life that I learned from that lesson from Beppy. And I've had many discussions with her since then. And she actually gives talks. It's the first thing she tells people. If you have a loved one that you get angry at, apologize. And by the way, I give talks to middle school in Texas about the Holocaust because they study Anne Frank. And then they ask me to come in and give the talk. And I got a letter one day from a young girl that was in my class. And she says, I want to thank you for the lesson about the apology. My little brother and I got into a fight and we didn't talk to each other. And then when I heard your talk, I went and apologized. So we went to a football game that night. And that night he was up on a bleacher. It was almost 20 feet high. And he leaned over and he fell over and he was in a coma. And she says, all the time that I was in the hospital, I was so thankful that I had apologized because I didn't know whether he was going to live or not. And if he didn't live, can you imagine how bad I feel? So the point is, whether you don't need to go through the war to do this, you have plenty of people, you have arguments with your wife, your kids, friends. That's a good rule, and it helps to get rid of that. Anger was a very big part of my life, Vishal, and it led me in many wrong directions. And but anyway, my folks did survive Auschwitz. I was in the orphanage from 2.5 to 6. There was a lot of deprivation, not intentional. They were Dutch people. They were hiding Jewish people at the risk of their life. But there was no food, and sometimes there wasn't even water. We used to go out in the field and try to eat plants and say, well, you ought to try this. This tastes pretty good. Everybody's figuring out what plants to eat, you know. And the water was also a problem. But I survived. And when my mom and dad came to pick me up, I was so weak. I was 6 years old, but I could barely walk. I used to crawl most of the time. And my dad says the bones just stuck out throughout my body. He was afraid to lift me up. So one day, when my parents came to pick me up from the orphanage, I see these people coming up this trail, the driveway. And that little girl I was playing with, she says, Arnold, guess what? I heard that those were your parents. And all the kids, whenever they saw parents coming up, they'd always run because everybody hopes it's their parents. Well, I ran up there so many times, it was never my parents, so I quit doing that. And I said, no, that's not my parents. Anyway, all of a sudden I heard somebody say, Arnold, come on in. Come on into the house. So I thought, she said, see, I told you. So I thought, geez, maybe that is my parents. So anyway, I ran in there, and my dad looks at me and he says to the lady, that's not Arnold. And my heart says, he said, he was bigger when we dropped him off 3.5 years ago. And my mom looked at me, looked in my eyes, and she said, that's Arnold. So he says, okay. They all said it was. So that night he went to put me to bed, and I asked him if he could pick me up so I could turn off the light switch and sing goodnight to the sun. And that was something he had done with me before the war. I was a little kid. He'd lift me up. When the sun went down, he would say, Dag Zonnetje, that's a little song, good night, sun. And I'd flip the switch. So I had obviously remembered that. And I asked him to do that. And he says, then he knew that I was his son. So he felt a lot better about the whole thing. And I sure felt better. I was so glad to get out of that. You just have no idea. And I didn't recognize my parents. I didn't remember them. But it didn't matter to me. I just wanted to get out. So anyway, we picked up my brother from the farm. And my mom and dad went back into business. Interesting thing about investing, a principle which applies in today's world, is my grandmother had told my father, if there's ever a war, turn your money to gold. And my dad did that. So he took his money, he closed his business because he was afraid the Germans would find him. He hid his machines. He was in the garment business, manufacturing. And he took his money, turned it into gold, turned it over to friends who hid it in gold coins. And after the war, you know, he went to a concentration camp, but the Germans looted the treasury. The Dutch government was broke. They had to issue new currency, went up 10-1. So his gold went up very dramatically. And the other thing was that there was very little competition when he went back into business because most people couldn't get machines because the factories were bombed and they didn't have equipment. So my dad had the money and he had the machines. He went right back into business. My mom ran the business. She was an incredible businesswoman. And they built up a pretty good business. But the main thing that my dad wanted to do, his dream was to come to America. So we eventually came to America. And then we had to watch my dad, didn't know whether he could get a job or what the prospects were. And it took him a while to get a job, and he always seemed to have trouble holding a job because I think he had his own anger issues, which it took me a while to figure out as I grew up. But anyway, we moved into a neighborhood that was kind of a tough neighborhood, and it was the kind of neighborhood where the culture was very violent. There was a lot of fights. There was a lot of bullying. So you can imagine here, I'm the skinniest, weakest kid in the school. Everybody wants to give me trouble. I'm the prey, you know what I mean? And nobody wants to fight a guy that's really tough. They want to fight the guys that can. Well, I avoided fights like the plague. I mean, I would do anything to get out of it. I was so scared of fighting. Because I was so weak, I knew that there was not much I could do. But anyway, one day we were taking school pictures and the class was lined up and they had to move the file over. And, they pushed me and I bumped into this kid. And he was one of the tough kids in the school and he wanted to fight me. And I said, I don't want to fight. I didn't mean to bump into you. I'm giving him. He says, no, today after school in the bicycle yard, that's it. So the first day I didn't show up. I figured maybe it'd go away. And I felt so bad for chickening out. I just couldn't live with myself. So he saw me again. I said, okay, I'll meet you today. But I didn't tell any of my friends because I knew I'd be embarrassed, So I'm climbing the fence to the bicycle yard, and he's standing there with his buddies all ready to go. Couldn't wait to get at me. He hit me. I went down. He beat me to a pulp. I never offered any resistance. I couldn't have been more scared if they said you're going to a firing squad. That's the way I felt. But anyway, he just got tired of hitting me. I was down. He was on top of me. And they finally left. And so I looked at all, my face felt like it really had beat up and my ribs hurt and blood all over myself. So I snuck in the back door of my parents' house so my mom wouldn't see me. And I went to the bathroom and I washed my face and I combed my hair. I was scared to look into the mirror because I just could imagine what I looked like. So I kind of went up like this. I kind of looked up to the mirror at first. My forehead looked okay. It just had a few scratches. My nose felt okay. I mean, it hurt, but it wasn't broken. And I looked at my eyes, and he hit me in the eyes, but they weren't black. So I thought, geez, so far so good, And I lifted them up. I thought, my God, I don't look that bad. You hardly could tell I was in a fight. And I thought, I had an epiphany. This was a major change in my life. I realized the thing that I feared was worse than it was. So I realized, God, can you imagine if I would have fought back, if I'd have hit him a couple of times? It wouldn't have been any worse, right? So I thought, my God, this is what I've been afraid of. If I can start learning how to fight and get stronger, I'll be able to handle myself. And I was very excited about it. And actually, it was like my fears were gone. So the second lesson I learned is face your fears. No matter how bad it seems, It's never as bad as you can imagine, right? So it didn't take me too much longer to get into another fight because it was all over the place. Well, I had been practicing fighting with my friends, and I had started in gymnastics because my brother was a very strong kid. He grew up on a farm. He had to work early in the morning, and there was a field gymnastics, and there was an event called the rope climb. The rope, when you walk in the gym, those big ropes hanging down, it's about 20 feet. So my brother was a pretty good rope climber because he was very strong. And the coach, he told the coach about me, and the coach says, well, why don't you bring your brother in? We can help him get stronger. So he says, Arnie, why don't you come down and we can help you get stronger? And I thought, well, that's great. So I walk in the gym, and here's all these guys with these big builds. And I thought, God, this is what's for me. So the coach says, why don't you start climbing the rope? And then after the rope, you get stronger, we'll move you into the other events, the rings and the high bar and so forth. So I said, okay. So I climbed for 2 years, 2 hours a day. And I was getting stronger, definitely getting stronger, and really helped me in the next fight I got in. And I started getting better at that. I was stronger. I learned how to box and, do some of the techniques that you use in a street fight. And I was doing much better, and I certainly wasn't afraid of it anymore, even though you get beat up and so forth. But anyway, one day all the guys were sitting around, and they said, one guy was going out for football, the other guy was going out for baseball. Van Den Berg, what are you going out for? Well, I'm going out for the rope climb. So there was this guy who was a bodybuilder, a strong kid, and he goes to me and he looks, you're going out for the rope climb? He couldn't believe it. And I was really offended, the way he looked at me, right? So my ego got involved, and I figured, I've been climbing for 2 years, and this guy hasn't ever climbed. He's just thinking about going out for it. So I ought to be able to beat him. And I said, well, why don't we have a contest after school? We'll see who can climb the rope. He says, are you kidding? Sure, I'll do that. So I had all my friends come, and he had his friends in a big event. And Vishal, he beat me so bad, it was like the kid that beat me in the fight. I was only halfway up, and he was already up there. It was the most embarrassing thing I can experience. And I went home, I was really despondent and depressed. And a thought flashed in my mind, why would you consider quitting? You started to climb because you wanted to get stronger, and you're getting stronger. Why would you quit? And I said, that's exactly right. I may not be able to compete, but at least I'm getting stronger. So I went back in there and climbed again. Well, the next year, I'm now in the 9th grade, and in my school, it was a 4-year high school. You could compete in the 9th grade. Well, I was so bad, but the rope climbing team had 5 guys on it, 5 guys from each school. So there was only 4 guys that went out for it. So the coach says, Arnie, we only have 4 rope climbers. Would you like to be the 5th one? And I didn't make the team. It was just like they needed another guy on the team. Well, those guys were climbing at around 6 seconds on a 25-foot rope. And the best I had climbed that year was 8.5. Just to show you how bad that was, in 100 meters, 1/10 of a second is a huge amount, right? Can you imagine how much 1/10 of a second is in a 20-foot? It's even more compact. Well, I wasn't 1/10 slower. I was 2.5 seconds slower. People would yell, go, 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 and the guy'd be up on the top, and they would quit yelling, and I'm still climbing, So it was a very bad year. And even though I had improved, I was very depressed about the fact that I wasn't getting any better. Now, this is after 3 years of climbing, right? So I went up to the coach and I said, Coach, what do you think I could do to improve for next year? And he said, Arnie, I'm glad you asked me. I've been thinking about you, and there's a new technique coming in. And this technique means that you use more rhythm and you use more of the sway of your body. It's more technique than it is brute strength. And so with you in that position, if you could learn that technique, it would make a big difference. I said, oh, great. Well, how do I learn this? And he says, well, it's brand new. I don't know it either. But if you go to the school, this is the guy that developed the technique. You watch him climb and you can learn the new technique. So I thought, God, this was wonderful. So I get to the place. I get there. It's 2 hours on the bus. I get there at least, I don't know how much longer, but it was a long time before just to make sure I wouldn't miss this. So I'm sitting in the front row and I'm waiting for this guy to show up. And he didn't show up. And now I'm really disappointed. You know, going on the bus 2 hours, probably took all afternoon. So I'm sitting there and I was just in a different state of mind. It was really something different because I look at the clock and things were swaying. And then all of a sudden the guy walks in. He's pulling up his pants. He's fixing his jersey. He sits up there and he shoots up a 25-foot rope in 4.6 seconds. And I was just in awe. I was just sitting there and I couldn't believe it. And all of a sudden, a thought popped in my mind and I said, you know what? That's who I'm going to be. I'm going to become like this guy. I'm going to be the next champion. And I got that in my mind. And I don't know what gave me that feeling that I could do that. But, you know, it was just that state of mind where you're just in awe and you want to do it. So all the way on the back, on the bus, I'm going like this. We're moving my hands around. I'm kicking my legs up. People are looking at me at the bus like I was nuts. But it didn't bother me because I didn't want to forget how to do it because I didn't have a photo and I didn't have a video. So I'd go to bed at night and I'd wake up in the middle of the night because I was afraid I would forget how to do it. And I couldn't go back to sleep. So I'd get up in front of the mirror every night and I would be visualizing shooting up that rope like this guy. My legs were kicking up. It was just beautiful. I'd get to the top and I'd lunge up. It was just like he was doing it. And that went on for about 6 to 9 months. One day I woke up. I felt like a different person. I couldn't believe it. I felt strong. I felt good. I felt confident. It was just like a new me. And I thought, my God, I'm going to break my time today. So all day I struggled through class. The teachers were just, it was agonizing. The whole day I just can't wait to get to the gym. So I finally get to the gym and I grabbed the coach and I said, Coach, I'm going to break my time today. He said, great, warm up and, go for it. So I warmed up. I grabbed a rope and I sat down. And as I lowered myself down, I just felt, oh my God, I am going to fly. I pulled down, and usually you pull down and you barely move. I just flew up there, and my hands were moving just like I visualized in the mirror. And I got to the top. I used to have to pull way down and reach up. I could hit it with my elbow. I knew it was a fabulous climb. So I'm hanging up there, and I said, Coach, what's the time? And he said, he's looking at his watch, come on down. So I run back, get down and run across the gym. I said, what was the time? He said, Arnie, this is so good. I thought there was something wrong with my watch. I said, there's nothing wrong with your watch. I'm going to do it again. Boom. I did it 10 times in a row. And I said to him, just the same thing popped in my mind. I said, Coach, guess what? I'm going to win the league championship next year. And he looked at me, and he was a very encouraging coach. He was pulling for me. He said, Arnold, this is really a great time, a big improvement. However, there's 5 guys on each school that you have to beat. And so, kind of put it in perspective. And I was a little embarrassed when I told him that. So I walked away and I said, bullshit, I'm going to do it. I know I'm going to do it. So all year I climbed. Most kids didn't work out off season. I climbed all off season. By the time I was going into the next year, I was doing fantastic. I was first man. And every time I went to meet somebody, they were always a little bit better, their time was. But I had it in my mind that I was going to win the league. And my buddies would say, well, how are you going to beat this guy? He's a little ahead of you. I said, I just have it in my mind. I'm gonna win. Every guy I beat as I went through the league final. Then I got to the guy who was so far ahead of me, people didn't think I had a chance. He was climbing 4.3 on the 20-foot rope, and I was climbing 4.6. That's 0.3 of a second. That's like miles ahead, So he's sitting there. He's kind of bored. He didn't have much competition, and I wasn't really much competition either. I sat down. I had that feeling. I took off, and my first climb was 4.3. That means I dropped 0.3 of a second. And this guy's sitting there. Now I hit his best time, and he is just shocked. I could tell he walked up that he was a little nervous about that. Well, he climbed 4.6. Never got any better than 4.6. So I beat him. And then in the finals, we tied. But, I was first and won the championship. The next year I broke the school record. I broke the league record. I won the league 3 years in a row. And I even climbed in the national AAU, all college seniors. These were all kids that were 4 years older than me. And I placed 9th in the nation. So that was just earth-shaking, And I never understood what got me to improve that much. But after I graduated from high school, I married my high school sweetheart, and here comes the big lessons in life. I got so depressed because I went through a divorce. I married my high school sweetheart. We were married, went together 4.5 years. We were married 4.5 years. And she left, and I got a divorce. And I was heartbroken, but more importantly, I was extremely depressed. Vishal, I was so depressed that I couldn't go any further at 3:30 in the afternoon. It was like I'd worked all day and night. I just couldn't move. So I really struggled with that because that was the time when I was starting my business. And I read an article one time. It shows you when you have something in your mind that you really want to solve, your subconscious mind works on it and it leads you to different things. So all of a sudden, I'm reading this article about a hypno nap that the hypnotist said, if you hypnotize yourself for 20 minutes, it's the equivalent of 3 hours sleep. Because when you sleep, you struggle for an hour and a half, then you go into the deep somnambulistic sleep, and then you come out of it an hour and a half. So when you go into hypnosis, you go right into that deep state of sleep. So it's the equivalent of a third of a night's sleep, 2.5 to 3 hours. So I would do that every day at 3:30. I'd go into hypno nap. I could work until 10:30 at night, and I felt good. So that was great. But I was still very depressed and very unhappy. My business wasn't doing very well, and things were really tough. So a friend of mine, she was a girl that worked in my office. She told me how she had gone through this, and she had a psychiatrist that helped her a lot. So she says, why don't you see this guy? And I thought, it seems a little strange to go to a psychiatrist, but I thought, well, I'll give it a try. So I met with him and I told him about, how I got through the day by hypnotizing myself. And he said, well, Arnold, that is a wonderful way to deal with the problem. But would you like to know why you're depressed? I said, well, yeah, that's the reason I'm here. He said, okay, I can help you through that. So I started going with him. And what we found out, as I'm going to show you in a chart, which I have, it basically says, if you are angry and you express your anger, like let's say you say something to me that offends you, and I say, Vishal, that really offended me. Then I've gotten it off my chest. It doesn't go into the subconscious. But if I want to be polite, or I don't want to offend you, or I'm afraid to offend you, then I keep it within myself. I don't say anything. Now we call that repression. You push it down. The more you think about it, the more angrier you get. So eventually it goes into the subconscious, what we call indirect expression. And then when you have indirect expression, it creates depression, addiction, compulsive behavior, alcoholism, smoking, gambling, eating disorders, sickness, and everything you can think of that can go wrong in your life. So one of the first things I learned, and that's why the lesson of apology was so good, is you have to learn to deal with anger, whether it's justified or not. Everybody has to deal with that. And the more you press it, the worse things get. So that was one of the big lessons I learned, is how to deal with anger. And I remember I thought that my anger was not unusual, because all the guys I hung around with were a bunch of kids who were also angry for their own reasons. They all loved to fight. And I got to the point where I was very strong, and I got to be very good at fighting, and I actually enjoyed it. This is a hard thing to believe, but when you're angry, and this is what people don't understand about violence, an angry person gets satisfaction out of hurting other people. It actually made me feel good if I could beat a guy up. And I think back now and I thought, Jesus, how could I be that distorted? So one day I was sitting there talking to my psychiatrist, and I told him about a time that a guy really upset me in my class. We were sitting in class studying. And I got up out of my chair and I hit him as hard as I could, and I knocked him and the chair over. And he came at me, and I gave him a couple of more punches, and the teacher just couldn't believe it. And I'm sitting there casually telling him this with a smile on my face, like no big deal. He says, he's just scratching his head. He says, Arnold, let me ask you, do you think this is normal behavior? And I thought about it, and I said, well, I think if my buddies were in my place, they'd have done the same thing I did. So, yeah, I think if you get ticked off at somebody, why do you have to take their crap? And he just said, we need to talk about your friends. So one of them had a father who was alcoholic who beat him. The other one come from Mexico, where they tied the kid to a tree and beat him to discipline him. And the other one, the dad hit him and his mother. So these were the kind of guys that I was hanging. Now, the great news is that I'm still friends with these guys, and we all grew up and we learned all these different things about our anger and learned to get over it. And so, but that's the way it was. So finally, he convinced me that all of the problems I was experiencing were self-induced because I was angry. So to show you how smart he was, or how shrewd he was, he wanted to explain to me one time that I was angry at my mother too. And I didn't want to admit that because, it's kind of hard to say you're angry at your mother, And I was angry at her. We learned later on that I felt she abandoned me when she sent me to the orphanage, like she didn't want me, So all my life I had problems with my parents too, my dad and my mom and so forth. So he was trying to convince me that I was angry at my mother, and I wouldn't admit it. So one time he said to me, and this was really exciting, he says, Arnie, I have an IRA over at this bank, and I would like for you to handle it. Well, I was really excited. I was starting a business, and here's a doctor who wants to give me some money to manage. And, I was really honored by it all. So I was very excited. He said, here's a woman at the bank, and give her a call, and then you can transfer the account to wherever broker you're dealing with. So I said, okay. So I called the woman at the bank. The minute I heard her voice, I got upset. She just really ticked me off. And so by the time I got through talking to her, I could barely handle it. So I hung up. So the next week I said, I can't stand this woman. I'm not going to deal with her. So anyway, I went there the next week, and he said, well, were you able to move my account? And I said, Dr. Rameljack, I got to tell you something. This woman is I just don't want to deal with her. And I used to figure him out, because when he would scratch his head, that means he was setting me up, He sat down and he put his head on the desk and he just laughed and laughed. Now I'm getting ticked off at him. What's so funny? I said, what's so funny? He said, Arnold, that woman is one of the sweetest women you'll ever meet in your life. But you know what happened? I picked her out. When I met her, I said, oh, this is perfect for Arnie, because she had a German Jewish accent. And the minute you hit that accent, you heard it. It reminded you of your mother. And now you're dealing with your mother. And look at the way you felt. And I'm sitting there just shocked. And he said, now, are you ready to deal with your anger? Isn't that amazing? So anyway, finally got through my anger. It took many years, but I got over that. And as I got over my anger, things improved. And, one of the things I learned from him, I said, let me ask you a question. You know, this girl that saved my life, 17 years old, and she's risked her life. I can't figure out what made her do that. He said, oh, that's simple. And this is one of the things that really changed my life. He said, if your life is more important than your principles, you sacrifice your principles. But if your principles are more important than your life, you sacrifice your life. These people were deep Christians. They believed they were doing the right thing, and they were willing for their principles to risk their life. Whereas these other people obviously didn't have much principles. They turned my folks in for $15 or 15 guldens and some food rations. So that really impressed me. And it really made me stop and think how important principles really are. And I can only tell you that every year I come more and more to the conclusion that all people have to do is learn to deal with the few things that can change their life. Number one, if they have any anger, they should work on it to get rid of it. And number two, more importantly, how to prevent the buildup of anger. Because the minute it goes subconscious, you have self-destructive behavior. And you can shoot yourself in the foot all the time. So the important thing is learn to deal with anger. And the second most important thing is to learn to deal with truth. And that's another thing. I would say anybody who wants to improve their life can begin by starting to tell the truth in all situations, business, friendship, marriage, everything. You immediately increase. It's amazing what that does. Just the truth. Now, I'll tell you how I discovered that. My dad, as I was growing up and I was going the wrong way, and he was unhappy with me because I was basically a juvenile delinquent, got a lot of trouble. And he said to me, Arnie, you need to read The Brother Karamazov by Dostoevsky. If you know which book I'm talking about? Okay. Dostoevsky was a Russian writer, and he wrote a book called Brother Karamazov. So I looked up the book in the library, and it was about that thick. Well, in high school, I wasn't doing very well. I couldn't study. I had all kinds of problems. And so reading a book with 2 or 3 inches, that wasn't what I was going to do, and I never did. But as I grew up, I started studying a book called, by James Allen, one of my favorite authors and my favorite book, From Poverty to Power. And James Allen was an amazing man. He studied everything you can imagine. The Bible, the Old New Testament, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishad, everything from Eastern philosophy to Christian to Jewish to Muslim, everything. He was just looking for the truth. And I really took to that book, and he made a statement once, a man can reach the pinnacle of success and fall lower than beast by encouraging the wrong thoughts. And I thought, how could a guy who really understands how to get to be successful give it all up for things that are going to drag him back down? I couldn't figure it out for 3 years. I thought off and on. But I knew I eventually would run across it. And here's the interesting thing. I read everything I could get my hands on, but I never organized my library, like most people do by subject and author and all that. I would just put them in I put in this section and this and this. But I would walk up to my library and I could kind of fumble around in the area and just move my hands and I'd be attracted to the book. So when I was first learning finance, I couldn't figure something out, I would go to either a bookstore or a library, and I'd go to the finance section, and I'd have the problem in my mind, and I would just go like this, looking through all the different books, and all of a sudden I'd be attracted to it, and invariably the answer was in that book. Sometimes I got it so close that I did it on the first, I opened it up, and there's the subject I'm dealing with. So what I learned is by studying the subconscious mind, that it's a wonderful guidance. And I'll give you a quick example of what made me think about that. My dad was on a death march in Auschwitz. They were moving the camp. It was sub-zero weather. He weighed 85 pounds. The snow was halfway up to his knees. And if you stumble and you got weak and your knee hits the snow, they beat you. If you don't get up, they shoot you. So he said, when he was starting on the death march, he said, Hugo, what's the most important thing I could do to survive this death march? Because he knew it was going to be tough. 24 hours, no breaks, a slice of bread about the thickness of 2 of our slices today, the water you get off the guy that's in front of you scraping off the snow. And he said he finally decided that the secret was he couldn't stumble because it was slippery, it was snowing. And so if he didn't plant his foot right, he could stumble and then the knee would hit the snow and the guard see him, he'd beat him. So he said he started to focus everything he could think about. He said, I didn't think about how hungry I was, how tired I was, how cold I was, how far we had to go, how miserable I was. I just didn't allow any other thought but just the focus of moving my leg and making sure it was firm footing. And he said the whole time, that's all I thought about. And after a while, I got into a rhythm. I actually felt that I gained strength. And he said it was just amazing. All I had to do was just keep focusing. It's kind of like I tell people, when you're a kid, you take a magnifying glass, you put it through the sun, and it burns the paper. You're focusing the energy of the sun. Well, what my psychiatrist had told me, the reason I had did so well in gymnastics on the rope climb is because I used the same principles that they teach in sports psychology. Visualization, repetition. Just keep on playing that in and being internally motivated rather than just being all over the place. So when he told me that, he said, this is what you did is we teach it in sports psychology. You couldn't have been a better student. But I didn't know even about the subconscious mind when I got there. It was just what I did because I had to do it and situations came up to do it. He said, if you will do the same thing with your business, the same thing's going to happen. You're going to be successful. As soon as he said that, my right arm chilled up. Whenever I hear a great truth, it actually affects the skin on my right arm. I can feel the energy. As soon as he said that, I knew that was it. So I went home. I had a studio apartment. I took everything off the shelves, pictures and everything, put the bookcases up, put all the books I could afford to buy at the time, and I just made a commitment that I was going to start the business. And that's how I got into the business. Now, you asked me once before, how did I get into business? Well, short story. Make it short, when I graduated high school, I didn't have any skills. I worked in a gas station, made $1.50 an hour. And I had just moved out of my folks' house because I had an argument with my dad. And a friend of mine and I got an apartment. And then the gas station went out of business. So I lost my job 2 weeks before Christmas. I'm in tough shape. I have to duck to meet the landlord because I was due for the rent. But I finally got a job. I knocked on doors and I found a job in a company called Richfield Oil. It was a big oil company. They had an internal printing department. I started there, became the supervisor, but I always thought about the idea of forming my own business. I just didn't know what kind of business. So one day I see an ad for an insurance company, be in your own business, basically was insurance salesman, but I was ignorant. I didn't know the difference. They showed me the insurance product. I thought it was great because I didn't understand compound interest. You know, you have a cash value policy that compounds at 3%, but after 40 years, it looks like a lot of money. So I was too ignorant to even know that that wasn't a great deal. But I was very enthusiastic about it. I did very well. Then the divorce came. But anyway, the insurance company started selling mutual funds. This is at the top of the market in 68. So now I'm studying the market and people are making 10, 12, 15%. And I'm comparing it to the insurance. And I thought, Jesus, how could I sell this policy? So I couldn't sell the insurance anymore. So I sold people term insurance where it just paid for the insurance. It wasn't a savings account. And then I sold them the mutual funds. The problem was I started at the top in 68. This is like a 20-year bull market. Be like if you started today in the stock market. And I didn't know anything. I was reading the mutual funds and I went to listen to the portfolio manager and I was just in awe of these guys, just like I was of the rope climber. And I thought, geez, all I have to do is sell it. And these guys manage the money and I can make money for people. And, you know, you look at the charts and, you know, it all looks great until the market starts going down. So now I got my license in March 68 and the market topped out in December 68. So it was all downhill. The market went down from 1,000 to 1,050. It went down for a year and a half to June of 70. So in June of 70, it got a reprieve. It rallied back up for a year and a half to the peak of 72. And then it went straight down for a year and a half and it bottomed in 74. Well, during that time when I was struggling with why these funds were falling apart and how the market could go, I started studying and I ran across an article on Benjamin Graham. And what impressed me about Benjamin Graham is the funds that I picked by dumb luck that were managed by guys who were followers of the value system, Benjamin Graham, they did much better. And the other ones, they just collapsed. So I thought, there's got to be something to this guy. So I've got an article. Then I started reading his book, and I was sold. And I did nothing day and night but study everything that Benjamin Graham ever said, wrote, or talked about. And one of the things that started to come upon me as I was studying, I realized that we're getting into 74 now, that stocks got so cheap, they got to 4 to 5 times earnings with 6 to 7% dividends, selling at 2 to 3 times cash flow. So I knew by going through the history that that was one of the cheapest times, even going back to the Depression. And the thing that impressed me about Benjamin Graham is my mom always told me as a businesswoman, don't ever buy something retail. You always got to buy it wholesale. I'd buy a shirt or I'd buy a sweater. She says, did you get it wholesale? I says, Mom, in these stores, you can't buy. You're thinking like a goy. You're thinking like a Gentile. So anyway, when he started talking about buying stocks at a discount from fair value, I thought, my God, here I can't even buy a sweater with a discount and I can buy a company at a discount. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I mean, I just was immediately sold on it. So I decided that one of these days I was going to open up my own shop as soon as I learned what I was doing. But through the 6-year bear market, I got butchered, but I learned so much. I learned about the private market value and the discounts and the intrinsic value. And one of the things that helped me the most, and I would say anybody that's coming into the business, one of the things that really made me feel secure that I could do it is the private market theory. If you find people that are sophisticated buyers and sellers and they come to a conclusion. You buy it from a discount from that. Well, if you're paying $50 for the stock and I could buy it for $20, $25, I'm buying at half of what sophisticated people, that seems like a pretty good discount. Well, what happened is, what I didn't realize, which was the next lesson, is private market value also moves up in a bull market and also moves down in the down market. So at the top of the market, they were paying 24.5 times earnings, And at the bottom, they paid 13.6 times earnings. So, you start getting a discount, you can still go down. But I finally figured that out. There was a wonderful service that I bought called Grimm's Acquisition. It was bought by Merrill Lynch. The minute Merrill Lynch bought it, you never heard from him again. It didn't go. But it was a 25-year history of stocks on every industry, what they paid. And what I did is I took every industry, I took all these statistics going back 25 years, and if you had a retail say, this is what a retailer would buy at the bottom of the market, at the top of the market. So I got the ranges. And so I could take every industry, I'd see how cheap they sold when the market was down, how expensive they sold, and then I used my mid place, and that's where I used my discount. So now we're at the bottom of the market. I'm 3 months away from the bottom. And I said, you know what? If I'm ever going to do this, the news was so bad, Vishal, you can't even imagine how negative everybody was. This was a 6-year bear market. So I told my wife, I said, we're either going to make a lot of money for our clients or the world's going to end. And if the world's going to end, what difference does it make what stock you own, right? So 3 months before the bottom in September 74, I started Century Management. And it wasn't more than a few months and my portfolio started taking off. And it really did well. You look at the first 10 years in the business was the best 10 years I've ever had. We averaged almost 20% and we outperformed the market by the S&P by 5%, And so I was getting business referrals from people who all owned the Nifty 50. They owned all the great companies that were selling at 40 to 60 times earnings, and I was buying stocks at 4, 5, 6. I don't think I paid more than 7 times earnings for anything I owned. And the portfolio, and so the business got going. But it took a long time to build up enough business to pay the bills. In the meantime, I married Eileen. She had 2 children. And so, but she was a tremendous help. I would say to anybody getting married, if you have the right wife, she was just like a partner. I mean, she did everything. So one night I'm reading and she's doing the books and she's got tears in her eyes. And I said, what's the matter, hon? She says, Arnold, I see you working day and night and the bills keep stacking up, because I wasn't making enough to pay the bills. And she said, I'm thinking about getting a job to help you so that I could earn some money to help you with the business. I said, Eileen, I just got through with 5 years of going to a psychiatrist. And one of the things I learned is the kids got to have a mother at home and they got to have a good father or they're going to end up like me, getting started the way I did. So I want you to keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job with the kids. You're helping me everywhere you can. And she was writing out checks. I said, give me a check. So she said, what for? I said, give me the check, son. I wrote to Arnold Van Den Berg, $250,000 for something you may like. I said, now, don't cash it this week, but one of these days, you'll have no problem cashing it. And just to give you the perspective, Vishal, this was, if you took the value of money in 74 versus today, it's 7 times. So that 250,000 is like I'm writing her a check for $1.5 million, and I'm in debt $120,000 in today's dollars, $20,000. I was grossing 8,000, which is about 56,000 gross in this day and age. But I had $150,000 worth of debt at this age, and I'm writing her a check for $1,250,000. You can see how ridiculous that was. And she looks at it and she doesn't know what to say. And I said, just put it away because I know one of these days we're going to be able to cash it. And so people ask me, how did you get the faith that, that you could do this? And I said, you know what? That's the secret of the subconscious mind. When you believe something deep down in your subconscious, it's like it's a done deal. It's like it's already happening. It's just the most amazing thing. And that's what happened to me when I was road climbing, when I really believed I was going to be a champion, it was like, nobody can beat me. I just don't see it. You know, it almost comes across as being arrogant, but it's just a deep faith. It was the same faith that these Christian people had, because they weren't afraid to do this against the German, even though they knew if they got caught, they'd go to concentration camp. It was just a faith. And I think the most important thing, if I can communicate this to your listening, is to develop the faith. Now, how do you develop faith if you don't have it? Well, we're talking about developing a self-image and believing in yourself. And the single most important thing that I would tell somebody to develop that is think about where you want to be 20 or 30 years from now. Picture that kind of person. Picture what prosperous. Matter of fact, my favorite saying daily, I'm happy, healthy, wealthy, and wise. No matter what happens, I repeat that. The more negative it gets, the more I repeat that. And you believe that, and you become to believe that. And when you believe it, things happen. You actually create things that happen. And just, if I can read you a couple of things about the subconscious mind, because this really does help a lot of people, and it changed my life. So this is a book I read, The Wisdom of Your Subconscious Mind by John K. Williams. Now, what's interesting is James Allen, who was the author of Poverty to Power, talked about the same thing. It was like a confirmation. Here's what he said. Throughout this book, I have assumed explicit the dictum of Cutworth that mind is senior to the world and the architect thereof. Your mind is the architect of your world. The creative insight and wisdom of the subconscious mind, when properly understood and correctly applied, sustain the following four statements. 1. You are the architect of your destiny. Every experience or condition in your life, poverty or riches, success or failure, health or illness, is the result of action and purpose set in motion by you. You create your own reality by what you believe and what you say. Second, within the area of your life, you have creative power. You can make a mental image. Now listen to this, a mental or blueprint of the progress and expansion you want to achieve, and by impressing the concept of your objective upon your subconscious mind, you can cause the condition you visualize in your mind to be created. Creative energy is the self-induced action of mind upon itself. The force behind all progress and achievement is energy created and applied by the mind. Now think about that statement when my dad was on the death march, and he said, just by focusing my mind, I gained energy. That is the energy from the subconscious mind. He didn't know what was doing it, but he knew that it worked, and he kept doing it. Third, you are a radiating power. By expanding your consciousness, you can attract what you want. Like the lowly amoeba, you can have only what you can surround and absorb yourself with. The universe cannot and does not give you anything. It does give you, however, the power and challenge to achieve, to create for yourself the conditions and resources you want. Fourth, you are the building, directing power of your life. Life develops only by mental and emotional power from within. Century ago, Hermes, one of the great philosophers, made the statement, all is mind. So there you have it from a guy that studied the subconscious mind for 50 years. It's a wonderful book. It was published many years ago. It's still very relevant, and I would recommend it. Now, one of my hobbies, and this is also an important thing in understanding the subconscious mind, I had an experience one time which taught me the value of collecting quotations that apply to you. So I was starting my business. It wasn't going very well. Even though I was starting to make money for people, it wasn't long enough track record to impress anybody. I didn't have an education. I didn't have any credentials, and I didn't have a long-term track record. So it was hard to get clients, especially when everybody was so negative. But one time I got a lead to a person that a friend of mine said, I spoke to him about you, and I told him what you did for me, and he'd like to meet you. So I thought, this is an opportunity to get a new client. So laid out everything and went to see him, but it didn't go well. He said, you know, Arnie, I'm impressed with what you're doing, but it's a short-term track record. And he was a sophisticated investor. He wasn't going to buy into that. And so I didn't get the client. I went back to my office and I'm sitting there on my desk and I'm thinking, how am I going to build a business without the track record and without any credentials? And I was kind of plagued by it. And the girl, I had a part-time girl working for me, and she's bringing all these annual reports of big mail, and she's carrying it across the desk, and she started to lean. The things were falling out. So I reached to help her, and here this book hits the desk like this, flips over, goes like this, and now I'm staring on it, and it says, I will prepare myself, and the opportunity will come, by Abraham Lincoln. I tell you, it was a gymnastic move, the way this thing flipped, and it was facing me, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I thought, my God, that's the secret. I'm trying to build the business. I should be spending my time preparing better. So I immediately quit trying to sell the business. I went into a concentrated program of studying the market and studying everything I could. And I put the quote on my desk in my Rolodex. I had a Rolodex, and I put it right in front. So every day it was in front of me. I could read it every day. And every time I read it, it gave me confidence. And you know why it gave me confidence? I knew that Abraham Lincoln was a self-made man. He studied it himself. He became a lawyer. He became the president, and he did it by preparation. So I thought, if I prepare myself and I become good at this business, the opportunities will come. I don't have to go out and research it. So that's what happened. I just devoted myself, and pretty soon things started changing, and I started believing more and more. Now, let me just show you how powerful this is. I'm going to quote Sir Arthur Eddington. He was on a peer with Albert Einstein. You know who he was. Sir Arthur Eddington was one of the most prominent, important astrophysicists of time. He made several significant contributions to the area of physics. He was one of the first physicists who understood the early ideas of relativity along with Albert Einstein. Sir Arthur Eddington is the guy who popularized Einstein. People weren't even aware or believed what Einstein was talking about, and he's the one that really understood it and explained it. So he was a peer to Einstein. Now listen what he said. Sir Arthur Eddington is quoted as saying, I believe that the mind has the power to affect groups of atoms and even tamper with the odds of atomic behavior, and that even the course of the world is not determined by physical laws, but may be altered by the volition of human beings. What he is saying is that our mind has the possibility of affecting groups of atoms and changing natural physical laws, which means the mind can influence matter. And if you think about what J.K. Williams said, that you're a radiating power, that as you become more knowledgeable and more focused in your mind, you're like a TV station and a radio. You're actually attracting and making contact with people. It's amazing how that works. Now, here's one by Gustav Jung, one of the top psychologists, claimed that the subconscious mind contains not only the knowledge that is gathered during the life of the individual, but in addition, it contains all the wisdom of past ages, that by drawing upon its wisdom and power, the individual may possess any good thing of life, from health, happiness, to riches and success. So he said that you not only could tap everything you've learned, but everything that has ever been learned. And by tapping into that, you can get all the knowledge that you need for anything you want to know. And I don't understand quantum physics because I probably would have a tough time getting through a fourth grade math class. But quantum physics teaches the same thing, that the mind can create reality. And by visualizing. Now, let me just give you one of my favorite stories. This is a book by Conrad Hilton. I'm sure you know who Conrad Hilton is, the Hilton Hotel. So he was born in a very poor family. They used to swim in an irrigation ditch. His family had a little country store, in a desolate place in Arizona. But he worked in the store, and then he went into real estate business. This is in 1914, before the Depression. And he built up a decent real estate business. And then the Depression came. He said people were jumping out of buildings. They were jumping out of my buildings. So he went broke. And so he lost everything. So him and his sons were sitting around one day, and they said, Dad, how did you get so successful? And he said, well, you know, my mother was very religious, and she told me always, Connie, you got to pray hard for what you want, and you got to work hard. So with what my mom taught me about praying and working hard, it all kind of came together. And the son said, Dad, we know a lot of people who pray hard and work hard. They don't have anything like you've got. There's got to be something else. Something's missing. And he said to his sons, you know, I think you're right. There is something missing, but I can't put my finger on it. Now, here's a guy that's been dreaming about doing all these things, and he didn't understand even the subconscious mind, like I didn't understand as a gymnast, but it worked because I used it. He said, here's what changed me. I got an idea when I made a flying trip to New York in the Grand Ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria. Let's see, here it is. Why, when I first saw my first photograph of the recently built new Waldorf Astoria, read of such luxury as a private railroad in a basement, a private hotel, these fancy ballrooms and restaurants, I was beating my way around Texas, half hidden under a 10-gallon hat, existing on a voluntary loan from a bellboy. My laundry was in hawk, and a gun-toting constable was trying to find places to hang up the court judgments against me. So here he is broke, right? It was presumptuous, an outrageous time to dream. Still, I cut out the picture of the Waldorf Astoria and wrote across it, the greatest of them all. As soon as I had won back a desk of my own, I slipped the dog-eared clipping under the glass top, just like on your desk. From then on, it was always in front of me. Now, just here's a classic story of visualization. He was broke. He saw this great dream of the Waldorf Astoria, took the picture, put it on his glass top on his desk. It was in front of him. Now, listen to this. This just gives me chills. 15 years later, in October 1949, the greatest of them all became a Hilton hotel. Now, what else you need to know? Think about that. 15 years, and he buys the Waldorf Astoria. And it's amazing. So he goes, it's really a good book to read. It's called Be My Guest by Conrad Hilton. And it's an interchange between him and his sons. And, I would favor this over an MBA program because it teaches you how to use the greatest instrument that has been ever devised. Even today, I always check how powerful is the mind compared to the modern supercomputers? Still way above it. You just give you a couple of incidents from us neuroscientists. They say your conscious mind can process 50 bits of information per second, which is a lot. The subconscious mind can process 15 million bits of information per second. So this is the power that we have within us. And as I get older, the more I realize it, we are like a precision instrument, and we treat it like it's nothing. Now, if you study the body and the mind dynamics, you will see how critical that is. So you not only have to study the subconscious mind to be able to utilize it and visualize it and do all these things, but you have to take care of your body, because the body, matter of fact, one of the top biochemists, this is Candice Pert. She is one of the Candice Pert, research professor of physiology and biophysics of Georgetown University, served as chief of brain chemistry at National Institute of Health for 13 years, published over 250 scientific publications. And here's what she wrote. Your body is your subconscious mind. In other words, you don't only deal with the mind, you deal with the body and the mind. Matter of fact, Deepak Chopra credited her with the idea of merging the Eastern philosophy, which uses the mind and the body as one, as opposed to the West that has the mind and the body separate. She's the one that's bringing these two units together. And here's what she said. Now, this is really interesting because I'm going to get into the next thing. I remember how I said to you that learning how to use anger helps you a lot. Now, here's why truth is so important, because I was talking about Dostoevsky. Here she says, reducing your stress levels. Meditation is one, and honesty. Now, you would never think that a doctor would come up with the fact that the honesty is so critical to the body. And play. Now, here's what she says. Honesty brings us back to center, the ground of personal integrity that when violated leaves us anxious and filled with self-doubt. So here is the top biochemist of brain chemistry in the body, and she's saying that if you don't have honesty, if you don't have integrity, it creates doubts and anxiety. Now, here's what Dostoevsky said. And I told you the story about where, my dad was trying to get me to read that. So one day I'm trying to think about what James Allen said, as a man can reach the pinnacle of success and fall lower than beasts. I thought, what could that be? So I'm in a bookstore. My wife is looking for some books for the kids. And I see this shelves full of blue books, but they're with different titles. I thought, why would they all put the same color title on different books? Well, it turns out to be a competitor of Cliff Notes, where they would do short versions of classic. So I'm looking through the class. I see the Brother Karamazov. It's only this thick. I thought, I'm going to get that to see what the hell was Pa talking about all these years. So I turned 3 pages, and at the third page that I broke up, it was about a third of the way through, he came up with his conclusions. And I wrote it down as the anatomy of a lie. I made it into a spreadsheet to explain to people. When you lie, you lose the ability to discern the truth in yourself and others. Now, what could be more important in life than to be able to discern the truth in people? And especially if you're an analyst, to be able to discern the truth, right? How much more important can that be? They don't teach that in business school, do they? When you lie, you lose the ability to discern the truth in yourself and others. Having lied, you lose respect for yourself and others. Not respecting anyone, you lose the ability to love. Now, this is crucial. When I think about, you mentioned Viktor Frankl from the concentration camp in Auschwitz, who was a psychiatrist and who studied people under duress. He made a whole study of it. He said that he was on a death march with his friend, who was next to him, and the guy whispered to him, I hope our wives are doing better than we are. And that made him think of his wife. He said, and I think it's on page 37 in the book, it just really struck me when it hit me, because my dad referred to the same thing. He said he got to thinking about his wife so strongly, so focused, and so concentrated that he lost sight of almost where he was. And he said he could feel her presence, even though he didn't know whether she was alive, and they were having a conversation. And he said, a thought transfixed me. For the first time in my life, I realized what all the great poets and philosophers said, that the greatest thing a human being can experience is love, and the experience and giving of love. That's the highest thing that anybody could achieve. That's the summum bonum of life, the supreme good. And he said, that's changed his whole life. Well, when you think about not respecting anyone, you lose the ability to love. So lying causes you to lose that greatest prize that a human being can experience is love. And you lose that. Without love, all that remains is the base pleasures of life. If you don't have love, you're empty. You're always looking for the next thrill. Indulging in all the base pleasure of life, you become morally depraved And it all started with a lie. Now, what William Tiller, one of the great quantum physicists, said when he was talking about the subject, when you are on the verge of a lie, ask yourself how much it would cost you to pay and to tell the truth, because in not doing so, you lose the ability to discern, you lose respect, and you lose the ability to love. So is that worth facing the consequences of a lie? And he called it magic. I'm quoting him. He said, is it worth giving up all the magic of life? Because he feels that everybody has this magic for miracles and all the things that most people don't believe is possible. And that's from Dostoevsky. So I think those are good examples of anger, truth, and the ability to use the subconscious mind. And you have to treat the body. I treat my body in a very special way, but that didn't come overnight. I have only been on the path of really focusing on the body for about probably about 18 years. And I became a vegetarian. I'm basically, most people would call me a vegan. I call it plant-based. I only eat things that are from plants, natural products. And I try to stick with that. So I don't eat dairy. You can call me a vegan as a simple explanation. It's a little deeper than that, but that's the idea. And this way you give the body the right fuel, and that affects the mind as well as the body. So the body affects the mind, and the mind affects the body. And so by focusing your concentration on that, you become a precision instrument, and you have to treat it with awe, because it's got all of these possibilities that you can do. Now, I wrote a thing about love after I read Viktor Frankl's thing. I really made it a point to study what is really love. What do you mean love? Is it a sexual thing? Is it a romantic thing? Is it? So I found the best example. If you've ever gone to a Christian wedding, they always read the New Testament 13th chapter of Corinthians. And it goes like this. It starts off, though I speak with the tongue of man and angels and have not love, I become like a sounding brass or a tingling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy to understand all mystery and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I can remove mountains, have not love, I am nothing. And so he goes through all of it. He says, love suffereth long and is kind. Love envieth not. Love vaunteth not itself, does not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easy to provoke. And then he ends up by saying, beareth all things, believe things, hope. And then he says, and now abideth faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. So I sent you my little dissertation of that, and I took the things that he said, love suffereth long, and I broke it down to today's English, because this is from the 16th century. So it's love envieth not, love vaunteth not itself. That means humility and so forth. So I broke it down and I studied each one of these characteristics. And I said, okay, so if I want to practice love, I have to develop myself to have these qualities, because those are the ingredients of love. And if you don't have these ingredients, how could you experience love? So that was a great study, and it really helped me to understand and to focus what that is. So when you get down to the main lessons of life, you get back to how can you be a loving person if you're angry? How could you be a loving person if you're not honest? It gets right down to it. Now, here's what's interesting. Most businessmen will talk about integrity and all that, but most of them don't really live it in the purest sense. And I'm not saying I do either. It's just an attempt. But if you're going to be, if you think about the monks, what they do, that's their whole concentration. They feel by developing love and understanding and spiritual things, that's all they need. And that's all you really do need, because it all comes to you. So I went through my quotes. I collect quotes now. And by the way, speaking about quotes, What I've come to realize is that quotes are not only good for impressing the thing that you want to do in your subconscious mind, but it's the subconscious mind speaking to you. If I tell you a quote, you might say, "Oh, that's wonderful." And somebody else might yawn. Why? Because that quote is hitting something inside of you. And so I've come to realize that whenever I read something and something hits me and says, "Wow," I stop what I'm doing, whether it's a newspaper, I circle it, whether it's a book, I go, no matter where I am, if I hear something, even when I'm on the radio one time, I stopped over, pulled my car over, and wrote the quote down because I knew the subconscious was speaking to me. And it was trying to tell me something, and you don't want to let those things go. So the point I'm making is listening to yourself is, now, I have tried to meditate, and quite frankly, I don't think I've been very successful at it. But I do it because it's part of the discipline. It relaxes me. I do my yoga moves. I've been involved in yoga for about 16 years, and it gets me into the mood of doing it. But my greatest secret is hypnosis. As a matter of fact, I had a meeting with 4 or 5 money managers from India. They came over, they wanted to meet. We had a meeting. The meeting lasted 5 hours. We were just exchanging ideas and talking about hypnosis and meditation. And we spent very little time talking about the market. We had a wonderful time. We're going to have another one, Zoom conference soon. But one of the things that I came to the conclusion after meeting with these guys, because they've been meditating for 30 years, so obviously they know how to do it. And I said, you know what, I've come to the conclusion, this is me. Don't quote me on this. This is my own personal opinion. I believe that when you meditate, you tap into universal intelligence and you get guidance from that. That's the purpose of meditation. The purpose of hypnosis is just the opposite. You're not looking to get information from the universal mind. You are directing what you want your mind to do. So one of them is receiving, and the other one is implanting it. And I got to be fairly good at hypnosis. I used it to train my son he was a shot putter on the track team. And we had a wonderful experience under hypnosis, just to show you how powerful it is. That he fell out of the ring and he had a big bump on his ankle. And we had a championship meet 9 days later. So I went to the doctor and he says, "Oh, I got to put him in a cast. He's not going to be able to compete in the meet. He won't be able to compete for 6 months." And I said, "Well, we got a championship meet in 9 days. And he says, "Arnold, there's nothing you can." I said, "There's nothing you can do." He said, "No." He said, "I have to put him in a cast." I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I can hypnotize him and anesthetize him under hypnosis." And he said, how's he going to spin around the ring with the cast on? It's a tape cast, but, it throws your whole thing off. I said, the subconscious mind will make the adjustment. You put him in the cast, I'm going to hypnotize him. So I took him to a hotel near the gym, near the track. I put him under hypnosis. Usually I took him out, but I left him under hypnosis the whole meet. And I said, here's what we do. Go spin around the ring a couple of times, make sure everything is online, and then you go for the win. And he said, "Dad, how am I going to go for the win with the cast on?" And I said, "Look, you're the best out there." He was literally one of the best. "And if you don't have any problem with the cast and you don't have any pain, then you'll be able to do it." And he said, "Well, that's right. So just take a couple of spins." He took a couple of spins and he looks back at me and he goes, "It's on. The program's on." So I told his coach, was standing next to him, I said, "We're going to win today." He goes, "Oh, you guys drive me nuts." And sure enough, long story short, there was an elimination meet, which he made it barely. And then he got into the final. And I could always watch him when I was training him. I could always watch it, that the key is how high you lift off. And then the proper flick. And it's got to be the right direction. Too much this way, and it goes that way. And if it goes too high, then it doesn't go as far. It has to be just right. So I jumped off. I said, "Oh, perfect height." I looked up at his flick. It was perfect. And I told the coach, "It's gone. He's got it." And I couldn't, it was like slow motion. There was the line here, and everybody was under the line. It was 50 feet. And it came down, and it looked like it was going to go before. And I thought, oh, no. And then it flipped over, and it beat the line. He won the meet, and he threw 6 inches off the best he'd ever thrown in his life. So that shows you all the techniques that you can use to regulate this instrument. And you know what the great truth is? It's so simple to do. It's real easy to understand. It's just hard to do. Okay? When I think about the complexity of computers, I'm in awe of how complicated it can be. And I'm thinking, here we have the greatest computer available to us, and it's so simple to use. You have to tell it what you want. You have to visualize what you're going to do. You have to keep on repeating it, and you have to believe it. That's it. That's all you need. And you can do anything you want. And that's how I believe, and that's how I do it. Now, there's one more thing. If we have the time, I don't know how much time we've taken.
No, we have the time. You tell me, how much time do you have on hand for this?
I'm not worried about my time. I'm worried about your time.
No, don't be worried about my time. I have as much time as you have.
Okay. So here are some principles that I feel are very important in people who are trying to get themselves going in life. And that doesn't mean a young person. It could be in the middle of life where people are kind of floundering around. They're not sure what they want to do or where they're going. So William James, one of the top psychologists at the turn of the century, he said, here's the secret to achievement. And I'm quoting him. The great thing in all education is to make our nervous system our ally instead of our enemy. Now, what does he mean by that? We want our nervous system to tell us what to do. He's talking about habits. So if you have a habit like brushing your teeth, you don't have to get up in the morning and say, geez, I have to brush my teeth. You walk into the bathroom, you pick up the toothbrush, and you do it. You don't have to think about it. That's because it's ingrained. And even if you weren't in the bathroom, you still wouldn't leave until you brush your teeth. So that is making a habit an ally. Now, if you're sporadic about it, you have the nervous system fighting you instead of aiding you. For this, we must make automatic and habitual as early as possible as many useful functions as we can, and as carefully guard against growing into ways that are likely to be disadvantageous. So the first thing you have to do when you start programming your life, you have to say, what are the important habits I need to develop to help me achieve this goal, to help my nervous system aid me, to help my subconscious aid me. In the acquisition of a new habit or the leaving off of an old one, we must take care to launch ourselves with as strong and decisive initiative as possible. Never suffer an exception to occur until the new habit is securely rooted in your life. Seize the first possible opportunity to act on every resolution you make and on every emotional problem you may experience in direction of the habits you aspire to gain. Professor William James. So what he's saying is, what I tell people is, don't start off with a ridiculous, ambitious program right away. You're going to say, let's say somebody gets on an exercise program, they're going to buy 2 hours a day. They'll do it for 2 or 3 days, then they'll be tired. It's not part of their life. It's not part of the habit, and they'll drop it. What I say is start off with very little habits that you know no matter what happens, you can always do it every day. Make it like brushing your teeth. It takes 2 minutes to brush your teeth. So if you're going to start an exercise program, you're not really geared for that. You start with 5 minutes a day. That's it. And you do that for a month. Just don't try to do an hour. Don't try to do a half hour. Just go a little bit at a time. Depending now, if you're an athlete, obviously you can do more. But let's say you're starting from scratch. You do a little bit at a time, and every day you build up. And then as you build up, you add on to it. Because if you're so used to brushing your teeth for 2 minutes, 3 minutes isn't going to be a big deal. But if you start out big and then you can't do it, then you drop out. So what I do is my daily exercise. The first thing I do in the morning, I do my meditation, a little yoga, get me ready. And then I have a trampoline, a mini trampoline in my office and wherever I go. And even if I'm on a conference call, I'll be on the trampoline. It's a little trampoline 30 inches across, and you can do all kinds of things. You can bounce up and down. You can go this way, do all kinds. I even do it with weights. So while I'm on the trampoline, I'm out there pushing my weights around and so forth. So you can make it as difficult as you can. Now, I started off with 15 minutes. Now I'm up to 45 minutes a day. So I do my warm-up. I do my little yoga. I get on the trampoline for 45 minutes. And then at the end, I do a very strenuous exercise, and I end it up, and then I get into the shower. So it's part of my life. I don't think I skip more than 1 day a week on the trampoline. Matter of fact, I do much more than 45 minutes. If I was on a regular call with you and we weren't doing a video, I'd be talking to you and I'd be on the trampoline. And I ask people, can you tell anything different? Most people don't even know I'm on the trampoline. So one time a friend of mine called me in the middle of the day, and I answered it, and I get on the trampoline. And then when we parted, I said, well, Sam, thanks for the workout. And he says, what do you mean, thanks for the workout? I said, well, if you hadn't called, I wouldn't have been on the trampoline for a half hour. So now we got an extra half hour on the trampoline, and we're able to talk. So you try to work things in that you can do two things at once. And the beauty about the trampoline is I love to do the trampoline to music. I have earphones, and then I play different music, and you just get lost in it. It's just wonderful. And the beauty about the trampoline, this was a study by NASA for their astronauts. They lose in weightlessness, they lose muscle and bone density. So they did a study of every exercises they could do for the astronauts, and guess what they came up with? They felt that the mini trampoline is 60% more efficient than running. Plus, you don't hurt your hips, you don't hurt your knees, and you don't hurt your ankles. And that's a big thing as you get older. I'm 82 years old, so if I was pounding away on cement, I probably need a couple of knee replacements. So that has helped me a lot to keep in shape and to keep the bone density going and things of that nature. So that's a very good situation. So by getting that going, that takes care of the body. Then I really concentrate on learning about the right meals and how to prepare the meals. And, so that's a big thing to help. Now, here's another thing that I think is very helpful along the lines of what William James taught. There's a gentleman, a psychiatrist by the name of Scott Peck, and he wrote a book, People of the Lie. Now, here's what he said. This really works in with your conscience, when you do something wrong. Like Abraham Lincoln said, when I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. That's my religion. Now, most people kind of chuckle and think, oh, that's cute. But it's way more than that. What he's saying is he learned to listen to his conscience because the universal intelligence has built this conscience in. When you do wrong, everybody knows when they're doing wrong, and everybody knows when they're doing right. But people do wrong and right anyway. Why? Because their desire, their selfishness exceeds their principle. So here's what he said. The more you listen to your conscience and do the right thing, the more that becomes a habit in your nervous system. And so you tend to go more and more. And he says, pretty soon, if you do the right thing all the time, it becomes harder to do the wrong thing than the right thing. But if you do wrong most of the time, it's harder to do the right thing, and it's easier to do the wrong thing because you're drowning out that voice inside. And that's the same thing with the lying. Matter of fact, I've studied that on the internet. You can go on and say, what happens to people who lie? There's all kinds of neuro studies on it. And they say that eventually what happens if you lie a lot, you deaden that voice within inside. Some people call it the conscious, some people call it God, some people call it universal mind or infinite intelligence. but it's something inside of you. When you deaden that, you now have no check on balance on what you do. And so the more you lie, the more that deadens it, the more you tend to lie, and the bigger the lies get. And so that's the danger. When you talk about the anatomy of a lie and the damage it does, you have to understand that it's the way you go. I will say this, that there is one person that I would like to mention that I think is very interesting when we talk about the subject of love. So Ashley Montagu he's a very funny guy. He's a British philosopher. Actually, he's an anthropologist, but he's delved into many things. So he said he spent 50 years about what makes people happy. That was his whole consumption of his life, 50 years studying what makes people happy. And they asked him, why did you decide to spend 50 years studying what makes people happy? He said, because when I was a youth, I was profoundly unhappy. And I wanted to find out what it is that would make me happy. And I got into anthropology and sociology and psychology and physiology. He studied everything. And here's what he came up with. He said the single most ingredient, the single most important thing to any human being is love, as we learned from Viktor Frankl. He said, now here comes the crucial question. What happens if you're not quite as loving a person as he was very subtle, as you're capable of being? Not that you're not, but of you're capable of being. He said the answer is very simple. He said, what you are is not what you think, not what you think, but what you do. If you act like a loving person would, you do things that loving people do, and you study the ingredients of love, one day you'll wake up and you will find out that you have become what you do. So that's his simple message, is you got to practice it. Now, I just finished a study in neuroscience where they studied the placebo. We've all heard how the placebo, and I use that to convince people that belief is more important than intelligence. For example, if you have a disease and I'm a doctor and I give you a placebo and you believe it, 40% of the people believe it, they are cured without any change in their physical situation. So there was a doctor I studied about 25, 30 years ago, interesting guy. He wrote a book, The Relax Response, and he was onto the placebo idea. And he said, the modern doctor don't even know how to convince people to use the placebo correctly. But if they did, and they could use techniques to get people to believe, he could increase the potential. You know, he's up to 70 to 80%. If he handles the placebo, where statistically you would be at 40%, he gets up to 70 and 80%. So I thought that was so that tells you about how important belief is, right? The more you can convince somebody. Well, then there is a person, his name escapes me right now, but he wrote Bruce Lipton, The Biology of Belief. He stated that belief is so important, it can change your genes and your DNA. So I would say when you put it all together, you've got to develop faith and belief. And the way you do that is by visualizing yourself as the kind of person you want to be, repeating it often and often. And whenever you have a negative thought, pull it out. James Allen gives, if I can take a minute to explain this, he has a wonderful way of explaining it. He says the mind is like a garden. If you're going to develop a garden, you're going to clear the place up. You're going to make the ground fertile. You're going to plant the seeds. And then you got to believe that they're going to grow, right? I mean, they could be there a month. You can't go out there. You don't see anything. And all of a sudden it starts popping up. So you have to prepare. You have to have the belief. And when the weeds come up, you got to pluck the weeds out, because eventually they'll choke off the roses that you're planting. So the mind is like a garden. if you plant good seeds, if you nurture them, you water them, and you pull the negative seeds out, then you will have a wonderful garden. Now, what if you have a garden, but you don't do anything with it? Then you have a bunch of useless weeds growing in your garden. It looks like hell, right? There's one weed here and one weed there. It's not a garden. It's just a patch. So the mind is like a garden. Prepare it, plant the seeds, nurture them, grow them, get rid of the negative seeds. Now, there's some argument about how many thoughts we have during the day. The latest statistics I've seen from different places is about 6,000 is the lowest number I've seen. But I've seen numbers as high as 70 to 80,000. Deepak Chopra, who's a neuroscientist, says he thinks there's 60 to 80,000 thoughts. But let's just take the low number and say you got 6,000 thoughts a day. Now, what I would do is, let's say you have a board, and every time you have a negative seed thought, you put a black dot. You have a positive, you put yellow. At the end of the day, what does the board look like? Now, if you do that for a week or a month, that's the way your life is going to be, the summation of those seeds, those thoughts. So the important thing is that you have to plant the positive seeds, but you can't just plant them. You got to nurture them. You got to water them. You got to cultivate them, and you got to take out the negative seeds. And that's why whenever I have a negative thought, I say, cancel that. I am happy, healthy, wealthy, and wise. I don't want any of these weeds growing in my garden. So that's the way I work it. So I think that we've covered the gambit. I have a lot of other material, but I don't want to bore you with it. I think that I've really covered most of the things. And of course, the important thing is the self-image. And if you do all those things, you raise your self-image. Because I asked the psychiatrist that I was going to, I said, Dr. Ronald Jack, how do you raise your self-image? And this is an important concept. He said, well, think about how your self-image was formed. It was formed by your parents and friends and the environment you grew up with. That's what made you. And some of them are detrimental, some are positive. The detrimentals are still in there. He said, so the way you improve your image is the way you treat people now, because they're going to be feeding back how they feel about you, right? So if you don't treat them right, if you cheat them, if you lie to them, you can't expect positive feedback. And if you get nothing but negative feedback, you're going to lower your self-image. If you do the right thing and you believe the right thing and you become successful and you're able to help people, you get positive feedback. So you constantly raise your self-image by doing that. And so that is why all of these principles that we talked about are important. And they all will help you no matter what you do. We haven't even talked about the market and analyzing stocks and so forth, but the principles are the same. Matter of fact, I went through Benjamin Graham's quotes. I have a lot of quotes by Benjamin Graham. Can I just read a couple that shows you, here's a guy that studied the mind and the body as much as anybody, and the market. Now, here's the summation of it. This is out of the total field totally out of the field. Character is far more important than intellect in making a man a good citizen or successful at his calling, meaning by character, not only such quality as honesty and truthfulness, but courage, perseverance, self-reliance. This is by Theodore Roosevelt. So what he's saying is all of these things are more important than the intellect, because you know a lot of people who have great intellects, they just don't do anything with it, or they do the wrong thing with it. So that's the foundation. Now, here's one of my favorite. This is by George Draper, and George Draper founded Dayton Hudson, which is now Target. Character stands out as preeminently the most valuable thing one can seek, strive for, struggle for in life. It does not come by chance. It develops slowly and can be easily undermined or wrecked. One must be content to live quietly and gradually prove to the world he is governed by motives that lead him to be honest, truthful, square in his relationship to humanity, broad in his friendship, generous in his judgment of others. We sometimes hear people speak laughingly of the so-called would-be social climate. The building of character is a different matter entirely. Character is a matter of slower growth, but the reward is certain. In this world, in the long run, we get just about what is coming to us. But here's my favorite for those people who aren't intellectual giants like me. Here's what Benjamin Graham said for people like me. Successful investment may become substantially a matter of techniques and criteria that are learnable rather than the product of a unique and incommunicable mental powers. So in other words, he's talking about you don't need to have a great, gigantic intellect to be successful in the market. It's more by learning the right principles and the concept. And there's another one that I really like. I think out of all the quotes of Benjamin Graham, I have 16 that talk about nothing but just the principle and the character. The genuine investor in common stocks does not need a great equipment in brain and knowledge, but he does need some unusual qualities of character. So I have 16 quotes like that have nothing to do with balance sheets and income statement. He's all talking about feelings and believing so strongly that allows you to go, I'm a contrarian investor. That's when I feel most comfortable, when everybody disagrees with you, especially everybody in the industry, which we've experienced in the oil industry recently. I told my son about a year ago, I said, I have never seen anybody in the oil industry that people were more negative on, including the executives of the companies. And when you get into that situation, you find stocks that are so cheap. I said, I have never seen stocks so cheap since the 74 bear market when I started, except what I've seen in the oil industry recently. Now, they've come up quite a bit. And we got in early and we got hurt, which is typical what happens when you're a value investor. Sometimes you see the values, you get so eager to buy them, but they get much cheaper. But even today, there are some small cap companies that are selling at 2 to 3 times cash flow. And I have a rule. If a company is selling at 2 or 3 times cash flow and it's got a good balance sheet and it's viable, you don't need to know anything else. You know, you might buy a range of them. You wouldn't put all your money in one, but it's pretty good sign that things are pretty cheap. And that's what's happened in the oil industry recently. And I think that the opportunities are still there, but that's another story. But I just wanted to give you the idea that when you believe in something, you need that belief when you're going against what everybody thinks, what the expert thinks, what even the presidents of the companies tell you. You know, and that happens, you know, if you're in the market and your portfolios are going down, you're going to be negative. Somebody calls you up and say, Vishal, what do you think about the market? Well, if your portfolios were down, you're not going to sound too enthusiastic, right? But that's the time when things can change, and that's what's happening. So one of the things that I like to do is look for good companies in very underappreciated industries or individual stocks. Doesn't always work out. Nothing is perfect, but it's a good place to start. You know, I think I read all of the thoughts that you had as what you wanted to accomplish on this program. Is there anything that I haven't answered for you that you would like to ask me?
I want to continue and seek some more insights on those very aspects rather than talking about investing, right? So you've covered something about investing, but I would rather want to seek your insights on living a good life. So I think that's the purpose, right? So maybe just a few more questions, and probably you can explain them in the way you want, right? But it has been a fascinating conversation, fascinating last 2 hours for me. You've talked about everything that one needs to live a good life, right? Worth more than 2 years of an MBA, or lessons from someone who's lived an experienced life for the last 80 years, right? So brilliant conversation, brilliant insights, and thank you so much for that. You've covered everything. Especially the part on the power of subconscious mind, right? Because that is one subject that fascinates me as well. Uh, I've not really read so many books. James Allen book, As a Man Thinketh, and Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. So these two books are one of my favorite, like a couple of my favorites on how do you harness your thinking, your subconscious mind to really do well in life, right? And you've shared so many wise quotations, right? So I'm sure you must have also heard of this quote from the Upanishad, the Hindu Upanishad, which is about the subconscious mind. And it says, and I quote, "You are what your deep driving desire is. As your desire is, so is your will. As your will is, so is your deed. As your deed is, so is your destiny." So that sums up the entire thing about the subconscious mind, and you've explained it beautifully. So thank you again for that. Uh, though you covered everything, I think there's some more insight that I can gather from you from my next question. And so I was going through your interview with William Green at an MOI global conference, where he said that one of the great things he learned from you is that however much money we make, however successful we are, if we do not have that internal life that gives us a sense of equanimity and control over our circumstances, it's very hard to have true prosperity, right? So I would want you to explain a bit about that idea of having an internal life, for I am sure that would contain some other fascinating insights from you, apart from what you've already explained.
Okay. Well, I think what I meant to say to him is we all know people who have a lot of money. As a matter of fact, in the money management business, you're dealing with people that have a lot of money. And what I've noticed in my clientele, there's some people that have, a reasonable amount of money, they're comfortable. And then there's people who are very, very wealthy. And what I noticed, even among my clients, that the people who are living the right way, even their portfolios, even though they're the same stocks, they seem to do better. It's a feeling of prosperity that they have. They're not anxious about their money. They're not worried about it. They have trust in whether it's God, in the subconscious, in their family, or whatever it is. It's a feeling of prosperity. And I don't think money makes you feel more prosperous. I think you have to have a feeling inside of you that you feel good about yourself. You have a good self-image of yourself. You're not too concerned about what other people think. You have a faith in what you do. And you feel good inside. You feel like you've arrived. You may not arrive at the ultimate goal, but you have a feeling of just being at ease. And I think that's the thing that you get, but you don't get it by getting more money. If you don't have it, you can have a billionaire and he's got a yacht and a plane and a dog and whatever you want, but they don't have that. They keep on needing more. And that's because they're missing love. Like the thing says, if you don't have love, then you're missing something. So if you're missing, this is where the affairs with sex come in. This is where the gambling comes in. I haven't been to Las Vegas for 20 or 30 years, but even when I was young, I used to watch the people play on the tables and, in the slot machine, and I could never get myself to do this. I said, what is the point? The statistics are against you. You can't win even if you walk away with a win, but people had a need, and that's because they have this subconscious anger, which is, self-destructive. I think gambling in general is a self-destructive process. I think if we were to analyze these people, a lot of them would be people who have problems with anger or people who have trouble with truth. There's something missing in them that they need this excitement. I don't need any of that. I feel very good. If we don't go anywhere, I don't feel I need to travel. I don't need to see the world. And sure, it's fun, it's fine, but I think what the peace that people are looking for comes from believing in yourself, in a higher good, and the fact that you're on the path of doing the right thing. I've got a wife who, my first marriage failed. Matter of fact, speaking about that, almost everything I ever attempted, I failed at first. And the reason is because I was very ignorant. If you're educated, you wouldn't have done some of the things that I did because I wasn't educated. I was ignorant of it. So when I got married, I went through a divorce and I studied what went wrong and I learned through it. And now my wife and I are going to have our 50th wedding anniversary in April 29th. And we've been talking about what we're going to do. But the point I'm making is I learned what I needed to know. Now, same thing in gymnastics. First couple of years, 3 years, it was a failure. But I learned from that and it made me successful. First time I went into business, I chose the wrong partner. I can't blame him. So a friend of mine, Bob Phillips, and his wife Lexi lend me some money. It was $2,500 to start my business. And I had a little bit of my own money, and that's like $17,000 in today's dollar. And I got into the partner, and after 6 months, we weren't getting along. We didn't see eye to eye. And I left the partnership. I lost half of my money, and then I started Century Management. So I learned from these things. And so everything you go through life, you learn what not to do. And then I had a quote by James Allen that says, you either learn by wisdom and knowledge and suffering and woe, and you continue to suffer until you learn. So I decided, maybe I should study wisdom because that's a lot less painful than having to learn it the hard way, right? So that's what's given me a feeling of, and I told William when he was in my office once, and I said, if I lost all my money, I would still feel very worthwhile because I have a whole stack of letters from people who've told me that my thoughts or my advice or something I did for them changed their life. That is eternal. If I lost all my money, I would still know I did that. So I feel like I lived or trying to live a worthwhile life. And that gives you, and the fact that I make more money, and I had a very good year last year, but money is a diminishing return. Right now, I have to spend a lot of time. My wife and I spend a whole evening going through the different charities that we support to make sure it's the right charity and so forth. It becomes a lot of work because even when you donate money, you can't just do it glibly. You have to think it. You have to research it. You have to think it through. And there's many times where I thought I was helping somebody by lending them money or giving them money, but it didn't have the positive effect. So even giving money has to be analyzed. It's work. So money becomes a diminishing return. But the things that you feel inside, what Abraham Lincoln talked about, when I do good, I feel good, that's much more deeper than it sounds. It means he has that feeling inside of him that tells him he's on the right path. And I have that feeling. And if I didn't have the money, I'd still have that feeling. I don't want to test that idea by losing money. You understand? But you know what? There's another thing I believe. I believe that poor people are poor because of the way they think, not because of their physical condition. So I've told people I could go broke. I could be broke, but I could never be poor because I know what it takes to make money. And so that gives you a confidence and a feeling that you can get. And my mom had that feeling. I haven't talked about my mom, but my mom was an amazing woman. I have never in my whole life met anybody that had her confidence. She just was unbelievable. And she even did business in Auschwitz with the guards. And she made the market in Auschwitz with garlic. Garlic is something in the East Europe. They view it as penicillin. And so people in the East knew that if they were getting sick or they were getting an infection, they needed to get garlic. So my mom had made deals with the German guards. She even had food smuggled from the men's place to the women, from the women's place to the men's place through German guards. My dad's sitting there one day, and a guard comes up and he says, "Are you Hugo?" And he says, "Yes." He said, "I have a present from your wife." And he says, "My wife?" Yeah, she brought you some food. So he pulls out his briefcase. He gives my dad a bag of food. My dad was just shocked, you know. But that's the kind of woman she was. She could always figure out a way. And she said to me one time when I was a little depressed about what my future was, I had done well in high school in sports, not good academically. And I was kind of worried about what I was going to be doing. So she saw that I was depressed, and she says, Arnold, what's the matter? You seem a little depressed. And I said, well, I am, Mom. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. She says, so what do you want to do? I said, I want to make some money. You know, I was making $1.15 in the gas station. She says, so what's the problem? I said, well, all my teachers tell me if I don't do good in school and I don't go to college, I can't be successful. She says, what? This is what the teachers teach you? That you can't be successful unless you go to college? She says, ask them how much they make, and then you would know how smart they are. So I said, what do you mean? She says, there's only two kinds of people in the world. There's the yucca, and then there's the businessman. I said, what's a yucca? She says, a yucca is a guy like your dad. He knows music. He knows mathematics. He can answer any question about religion. He can tell you about philosophy and history. Can he make money? Nothing. Ask your mother. Does she know about history, mathematics, religion? No. Does she care? No. Can she make money? 2 thumbs up. So she says, all you have to do is decide. I said, but Ma, I don't know anything about business. She says, look, business is easy. You have a product. Somebody has to make the product. You can decide to make the product, but you can take somebody's product and then you sell it to somebody. And that's what I do. And Manya's in the middle. She makes her cut out of that. That's business. You find a good product, you find a customer, and you make money in between. And she says, you know, in our business, I didn't know what Pa was doing. He was designer. They were in coats, ladies' coats and suits. She says he was a designer. He was such a fanatic. He produced good merchandise. So I took the merchandise and I did the marketing. I did the selling. And that's what I do. She says, I wouldn't know how to make a good dress or a good coat, and I'm not interested in knowing. I just need to know, how do I get somebody to buy it? That's the key. She says, now your dad could never do that. She says, you know what he used to do? He would come by the girls that were sewing the dresses, and he would look at it, and he would get so upset that he grabbed the dress, pull it out of the sewing machine, throw it in a box, and he says, I will not put my name on that dress. I want it done right. She says, and the girls would end up crying, and she'd go by, and she says, listen, my husband is a fanatical, but that's why he has good merchandise. So what you do is you don't get upset. You let him rip it out, throw it in the box, and at the end of the day, you put it in this one place, and I will take it and send it to somebody else. They'll finish it. I'll put a different label on it, and we'll sell it. So, you know, she kept doing this, and she said she was selling so many of it. So she created a little store, and she had a place with a red curtain made with golden things pulled down. So people would come in the store, look for it. If they couldn't find anything, she says, I think I know what kind of person you are. You want something special. You want something that other people don't have, right? Come with me. So he pulled the curtain down, opened the thing up, and here's all these second dresses under a different label. She says, nah, see if you can find some. They always found some. Not only that, she would get referrals. She says, I have a group of weirdos. They want the referrals. So when I see somebody in the shop, they can't find something, out comes the curtains. But she was a salesperson, you know. Amazing. So the point I'm making is that, getting back to your question, it's a feeling inside of you when you feel worthwhile. And you can't do it by piling up money. It's that simple. Matter of fact, I have a study that shows, it was done, I forgot the name of it, but I'll give you the bottom line of it. It says, what relationship does money have to happiness? So they show people that earn less than 25,000. They show only 10% are happy, so much in between, and so many are unhappy. And when the income goes above what it takes to live, there's a greater percentage of people happy. But then when it keeps going, it doesn't enhance the happiness anymore. So in other words, if you don't have to eat, any food will do. But after you have a full meal and you have a meal all the time, it doesn't make you any more happier if I said, Vishal, would you like another steak? After you've had a big plate of everything. So it's the same thing with money. When you don't have any, it's everything. But at a certain point, it becomes a diminishing return. And you know how I discovered that? I didn't think it through. It was by accident. I was going through a very bad period one time. And there were a number of my friends, which I grew up with, who had a lot of problems, as I did. And we were always good friends. Matter of fact, we met in the 10th grade. We're still friends today. We talk to each other regularly. We visit each other, except lately. And they also learned, but they needed help. And so I found, even though I was going through a very bad period, I helped my friends, and they were so appreciative, and I felt so good about being able to help them that I felt good. And I said, here I am, struggling with my own finances, trying to build my business, but I felt good, as Abraham Lincoln says, when you do good, you feel good. And that's why I don't think this is a much deeper thought when he said that than what meets the eyes. It means that there's something within us, whether it's from the divine, universal intelligence, infinite intelligence, God, whatever, that when we are in tune with the universal mind, we get a good feeling. And that you cannot buy. You have to earn that.
So fascinating insights, Arnold. Thank you for that. In the answer to my first question, right, where you talked about your life lessons and your history and in your growing up years, I could sense how hopeless times you've been through in the early part of your life, right? A large part of your life, in fact. At this stage, at your age, right, after having spent like 82 years on this planet, right, what makes you the most hopeful about humanity going forward?
The very truths that I have tried to teach. I believe that people could be so much happier and the world could be so much better place if they understood these principles. And that's why I have collected, I've got 550 pages of this information that I like to share with people. And I'm not looking to make any money off it. Matter of fact, I'm going to donate it. But the point about it is, the faith in humanity is, if I was in the depth of a depression or the end of a war, I would still believe what Viktor Frankl discovered, that the greatest thing in the world is love. And if we all learn to practice that, and what James Allen did is what convinced me. You know, you see what's going on in the world and you just want to do something, right? With the political situation, with the war's potential, all that. And you want to go out and say and do something. And he said, if you want to reform the world, reform yourself. And the reason that's so true is my world is wonderful. The whole world isn't wonderful, but my world is. So your world is what you think about and who you interact with and who you're friends with and who you love. That's your world. It's not the world out there with Putin in the Ukraine. There are people that are very happy in Ukraine, and I'm sure there are people who are very miserable, and there are people who are hopeful, and there are people who are not. Let me give you an example. I was giving a talk to the middle school about the Holocaust and about Anne Frank, and they asked me something about racism, and I said, let me tell you something about racism. This is all Bubamisa. You know what the word Bubamisa means? Bubamisa is a Jewish term. It means Bubba is grandmother. It's grandmother's tales. It's like Hansel and Gretel and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's a word we use, like I say, in Texas, if you step out in the pasture and you step on something that smells, That's what Bubamais is. So I said, racism is ridiculous. And here's why. There's only two kinds of people in the world. In every race, you name me the race and I'll show you that there are people who are good people and there are people who are not good people. And what is the difference? This is what I learned from my experience in the Holocaust. There was a 17-year-old girl who was willing to risk her life for me. There was a father who sent her on a suicide mission and risked everybody in the family because he believed in the good things. And it turned out good. And then here's a person who turns my parents into a death camp for a food ration and 15 guldens. So those are the two kinds of extreme. And it's not the race. It's not whether they're white, brown, black, or blue. It's the fact and the way they think. And that's who they are. And what you believe, like they said in the neurostudy, it's not what you eat, it's not what you think, it's not what you do, but what you believe. These people felt that they were serving God by taking care of people who were threatened with death. And the other people were only thinking about themselves. So the real key in life, we are programmed for selfishness, survival, right? That's what we are programmed for. So the secret to being a human being is to overcome the selfishness. And when you overcome the selfishness, matter of fact, I have a quote that says, to the degree that love is unconditional, it brings a joy and a pleasure that can't be bought. It's when love is unconditional, not I do you a favor and you do me a favor. That's not love. That's business. That's negotiation. But when I do something or you do something for me just because you love me or because you want to help me and you feel good about that, that's unconditional love. And when you have that, you don't need anything else. That's the ultimate, that's the summum bonum of life. That's it. Don't look any further. But they're all part, right? You can't do without money. You can't do without certain things and so forth. So there are some essentials, but it's ridiculous to spend your life piling up things that are not going to make any difference in your life and other people's life.
That's true. Wonderful. So just a couple of more questions, and I'll then let you go. So the first question is, can you just list out your favorite books on, say, the power of subconscious mind and just living a good life? Maybe 2 or 3 books that have really helped you a lot in your journey.
Okay. You know what? My favorite book is From Poverty to Power. If you read that book, have you read that one?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, if you read James Allen, let me give you a little history of James Allen. I read a book that was written by his wife about him. What his whole mission in life was, and he wrote it in the book. He says, I looked around the world and it was fought by the fiery flames of passion. And I saw people unhappy, rich or poor. And I dreamed of writing a book that could help people, rich or poor, to overcome those problems. And now I send it on its mission of healing, knowing that it cannot fail to find the homes and hearts who are ready to receive the message. So what he would do is he would get up every morning at 4 o'clock. He lived in England around 1857, died in 1910. And he would meditate for 4 hours. Then in the afternoon, he would write all the things that he learned through the meditation. And then in the evening, he would meet with fellow philosophers to debate the ideas. And she said, and this is what really impressed me, she said one of his main tenets was, no matter how much it seemed like it was true, he would never write about anything unless he experienced it in his own life or he saw it working in other people's lives. So he thought everything through to its logical conclusion. He wrote about 30 or 33 books. I don't know how many, but I've read almost all of them. And I called up the publisher one day because I wanted to give it to a gift. When I have a client review, I wanted to give everybody the book. So he said, I would like to give you an order for Poverty to Power. And he said, how much would you like? And I said, well, I need about 500 or 600 right away, but I'd like to have an inventory of about 2,000. So when I do other seminars, I can give them out, or when I give them to friends and family and so forth. He says, Arnold, I only sell 15 a year. I said, what? He said, I only sell 15 a year, and that's why I don't spend a lot of time on the typesetting and the cover. It looks like a Xerox copy of a book. I said, I'd like to have the typeset and a nice cover on it. And I said, I'll tell you what, Skip, I'll make a deal with you. I will pay for the typesetting, I'll pay for the cover, and I'll order 2,000 books, and you can be the publisher, and then I'll buy them from you wholesale. Yeah, and you can have all the profits. I don't care. I just want the book. He said, great. So I ordered initially 2,000 of them. So in that, because I was able to publish it, I wrote the reason I wrote I give out the book. And basically, I'll quote what I said. I said, basically, when I first started studying about life, I realized I was very deficient in many areas. So I studied the subconscious mind, hypnosis, religion, anything I can get my hands on, the lives of great thinkers and people who are accomplished. And it was my goal one day to save all these things like I've done, and to one day publish a book that would explain those theories. But after reading James Allen for 27 years, and I've read him now for 40 years, I don't think I can improve on the book. So instead of publishing another book, I'm passing this out with great pleasure. I hope it'll do as much for your life as it's done for me. And so while I have all of this gathered, I don't think I could write a better book than he did with everything I've gathered, because I'm not a writer. And so I don't really need to write the book as long as there's one out there that I like. Now, if you'd like a few other ones, I can give you some because I have them here.
Sure, please.
The Knack of Using Your Subconscious Mind by J.K. Williams. The Wisdom of Your Subconscious Mind by J.K. Williams. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. The Magic of Believing by Claude Bristol. The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. Self-Mastery Through Conscious Auto-Suggestion by Emil Koo, or I don't know how to pronounce his name. It could be Covey or whatever. A Practice of Auto-Suggestion by Emil Koo. How to Practice Suggestion and Auto-Suggestion by Emil Koo. Be My Guest, Conrad Hilton. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Scientific Healing Affirmation by Paramahansa Yogananda. And I have a whole list of other ones, but those are the basic ones. Now, the ones I didn't mention, who was one of my favorite, is Emil Koo. Do you know the story of him?
No, I don't, but I would love to hear.
Oh, okay. Well, Emil Koo was a French pharmacist in the turn of the century. And he noticed that when people would come, the pharmacist was like the country doctor. They'd go to the pharmacy and say, I have a skin rash or I have this problem, and then he would give you the medicine. That's the way it was done in the old days. He noticed that if he really believed in the medicine, it worked great. And if he said, well, why don't you try this? It didn't work. So he realized that the difference wasn't in the medicine, it was in what people believed he said about the medicine. So he says, I don't really need the medicine. I just got to get them to believe. So what he did, he started with hypnosis, but he said that hypnosis was too problematic because people thought it was voodoo and they had all kinds of theories. And so he used hypnosis, but he didn't say it was hypnosis. He called it autosuggestion. So what he did is he had a rose garden, beautiful garden. He said he had roses there, and he would play classical music, and he would have people come into the garden, sit there, and then he would walk and say, what is your problem? Well, I have stomach problems. So he would get them he gave them a formula of thinking. Every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. That's all he had them do. Repeat it 30, 40 times a day. Don't say you have a stomach problem that you want healed. Every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. And then as he built a reputation of a healer, people were coming from all walks of life, and he developed all these little techniques. Like there was a guy who couldn't raise his arm higher than this. It was like a lock. And if you pushed it harder, it hurt. He said, you know, the only reason you can't lift your arm, because at one time it hurt to do it, and you got to believing that you couldn't do it, but you really can. And he would just start lifting the thing up. He says, you see, it doesn't hurt, does it? Just lift it up a little bit. Pretty soon at the end of the session, the guy could lift his arm up because it was all mental. So he became a real good psychologist. He could read people, tell what there is. And he developed a tremendous reputation. And so he came to America and he taught all these principles. And they laughed him out of the place. They didn't believe it. America wasn't ready for it. So he was very discouraged. But he was a real hero in France. And the school that he taught, it's the Nancy School of Suggestion, which he founded. And if you just look it up and get his book, anything that he wrote is worth reading. Trust me. And his whole secret was suggestion. And so the reason he didn't use hypnosis, because if I was going to hypnotize you, you would say, okay, Vishal, I'm going to hypnotize you. Say, okay, lay on the floor, get relaxed, think about this. I'd give you an induction, and pretty soon you'd relax. And then I'd give you the suggestion. Well, he figured, why bother with the hypnosis? I'll do it without calling it hypnosis. I just call it auto-suggestion. So he'd get the people in the garden. They'd all relax. He played a beautiful music. They're sitting in a beautiful environment. He's very charming and entertaining, and he'd get people to relax. And then he'd hit them with the auto-suggestion. I'll give you an example. I had my periodontist. I used to have gum problem. So I went to him, and he had me in suspended animation one time up there. He was telling me about his son who was having problems going through med school. And he was very depressed, and he was very depressed about it because his son was a bright kid. So I said, why don't you send your son over and I'll have a talk with him? So he kind of looked at me like, what the hell are you going to do, And I said, look, I've been through this kind of thing, and I told him a little about my life story and been able to overcome some things. I think I can help your son. So he says, okay. So the son came over. We talked about 45 minutes, and I got him to talk about his past, and I got him relaxed. I didn't want to say, let me hypnotize you. So I just got him relaxed. And then I said, you're a very bright young guy. There's no reason why you can't make it. It's just a matter of believing it. And so I went through the whole spiel about it. And he left, wrote me a nice note, never heard. 26 years later, I got the letter about 3 years ago. He wrote me a letter and he said, I was sitting together with my family, and over the years, it made me realize how important the session with you was. And you almost like a subliminal cut in my mind. I went back to school. And the other problem was he was a young guy and he couldn't make it with the girls, and he didn't have any friends, and he was failing out of medical school. I said, don't worry about the girls. You're not going to be attractive to girls if you're depressed and you don't have any confidence in yourself. You get yourself together, you get yourself into medical school, the girls will come. Don't worry about it. So anyway, the long story short, he wrote me a 3-page letter, and the bottom line of it is he said he finally realized. He went back to school. He got into a good university, a medical school, and as the years went by, he realized how important that principle that we taught him in 45 minutes was, and he listed all of his accomplishments, which were really impressive. And he said, here's the good news, what you told me. All of a sudden, I started dating the girls at UCLA. It was some of the most beautiful girls in the world going to that school. And I even married one of the hot girls from that school. So he ended up. But it was a wonderful thing. And this is what I told William Green when I was showing him these letters. I said, this is what warms my heart. I can go and read that letter and feel great that with just a little bit of extra effort, you're able to change somebody's life, and it has nothing to do with his intellect or his capabilities or anything else. It just has to do with belief. And just think what you can do with people like Dr. Benson. He gets people to believe instead of 40%, he gets 70%. Now just think about the people who he heals without giving them a pill. And that's what you're doing, right? Through your podcast. You're helping people to learn to think, to believe, to do the things that are necessary. And that's going to make you feel good, right?
It certainly does. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah. That's what it's all about. You have any other questions?
Wonderful. No, so thank you so much, Arnold, for your time, your insights. Right, it's been lessons like worth emulating for life, right? So wonderful, like 2.5 hours. You've spoken everything that you could, I think, in these 2.5 hours, which I could have learned or grasped. But definitely, I look forward to meeting you in person one day. Seeking more
I would love that.
Thank you in person. Yeah. So thank you so much for everything.
And if you need any of the information, I can give you a kind of an index. The reason I can't send it all to you, because it's kind of a mess. There's notes on it, scribbling and articles, but I'm going through it. And if you have any thoughts about the things that I talked about, please, by the way, I really loved your book. And by the way, one of my clients was in the office and she saw your book. And she's looking, she says, geez, this is really interesting. Do you have any extra copy? I said, no, I don't have extra copy. You take this one and I'll have him send another one. So I don't know whether you send it to her, but I ended up with a book.
No, I sent her a copy to her. I sent her a copy to her.
Yeah. And I kept my book, but I can't wait to go through it because I went through it kind of fast to get the idea. But I like to go back and underline it and study it. But you have collected, you have a collection yourself. And I'm sure that has guided your life, right?
It certainly has, Arnold. It certainly has. That's what I'm trying to
so it's a pleasure to meet you, and I'll look forward to talking again. And if you ever come to Texas, I'll get you some good barbecue, even though I don't eat it myself.
Sure. Thank you so much, Arnold, for your time and insights. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.